So, welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being present for this new moon in Sagittarius workshop. And it's the solar eclipse as well in the sign of Sagittarius. And I wanted to just be able to take a moment to really feel what that eclipse quality or energy is like. So, what happens when there is an eclipse? We enter into two eclipse seasons in the year, and the eclipses are based on uh, when the alignment of the sun and the moon at either the new moon or the full moon are close to the nodes of the moon. So the nodes of the moon are the point. They're points in space. They're not actually physical bodies. So basically, the Earth is moving along its orbit around the sun, and then the moon is moving along its orbit around the Earth, and those two orbital paths intersect at 2 points. So where the moon crosses in front of the Earth as it's going along its orbital path, that is called the North Node. And where the moon crosses on its orbital path behind the Earth, that's called the South Node. And there are a lot of different names for the North Node and the South Node in various astrological systems. In the Vedic system, they're Ketu and Rahu, and they can be seen as the head and the tail of the dragon. Now, every month we have a new moon and we have a full moon. So we have the full moon occurring when the Earth is positioned between the moon and the sun. So that's why the moon is fully illuminated at the full moon. At the new moon, the moon is positioned between the sun and the Earth. And so the moon disappears into the light of the sun. New moon, we don't see the moon. But when there's an eclipse, that is when this new moon takes place very close to one of the nodes. Or if it's a new moon, it's taking place close to one of the nodes. If it's a full moon, it's taking place on the nodal axis or near the nodal axis, within 16 degrees of that. And when that happens, that's when all the alignments are such that the moon moves in front of, with the new moon, which is the solar eclipse, the moon perfectly obscures the sun. And it is one of the great mysteries of this cosmos that from where we are positioned on the Earth, we look at these two different celestial bodies, the sun and the moon, vastly different in size, in makeup, and completely different in terms of their distance from us. And one of these beautiful mysteries that the sun and its relative size and distance from the Earth, and the moon, its relative size and distance from the Earth, make them appear as equal sizes, equal shapes in our sky. And so the moon is perfectly set up to obscure the face of the sun at a solar eclipse at the new moon. And when this happens, this perfect alignment of sun and moon, the light of the sun disappears. It disappears into the moon's darkness. And if you've ever seen a solar eclipse, there's this amazing thing that happens. I've talked about this before in this forum. There's this beautiful thing that happens where the light takes on a quality that we don't see at any other time. It's not like twilight, it's close. There is a little bit of that feeling like dusk, sunset, twilight, where the light's beginning to fade, the colors are changing. And this is how the animals respond. This is how the birds respond. They respond as though it's suddenly becoming evening, or when the moon starts to obscure the face of the sun. So there's this kind of confusion amongst life on Earth. What's happening? The light of the sun, that vitality, that radiance is disappearing. Why is it disappearing? but it's not quite like twilight. It's a little different. It has more of this strange silver glow. I remember the first time I saw it, I thought, this is elf light. I didn't even totally know what I meant. I thought, this is elf light. This is the light between worlds. This is the commingled light between the sun and the moon. This is what illuminates their sacred marriage. And the fact that we get solar eclipses twice a year, it feels to me like this renewing of marriage vows between the sun and the moon. It's this conjunctio, this coming together, this hieros gamos, sacred marriage between the sun and the moon. And again, if you've ever been witness to a solar eclipse, it does feel like being in some ways present at a wedding, but there's something even more intimate about it. It's almost like being present at this cosmic lovemaking. And so this is what happened this morning. This morning, the sun and the moon came together and formed their solar eclipse. And that set forward this new moon, this lunation cycle. And what an extraordinary cycle to set in motion, that this isn't just a new moon, but this is the lunation cycle that's going to see the culmination of one of the most significant transits of our time, of this last year. It's been building, but really is marking the end of a major cycle and the beginning of a new one. And I'm speaking to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that's going to perfect on December 21st, which is the winter solstice. So this beautiful configuration that's taking place, where we have this lunation cycle is initiated, it's inaugurated with an eclipse in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a Jupiter-ruled sign. So there's this very kind of celebratory quality to the sign of Sagittarius, a celebration and expansion, looking beyond to new horizons. So this eclipse takes place in Sagittarius and then is leading into this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And the fact that it's happening on the winter solstice feels like such a beautiful synchronicity to me, because so in the northern hemisphere, this is the winter solstice. In the southern hemisphere, it's the summer solstice. And solstice means sun stands still. Sol, sun. The sun stands still at the solstice. Now, what does that mean? It has to do with what we see on Earth with the sun rising. So if you ever, let's say you track the sun rising throughout the year, you'll notice that the sun rises along the horizon, and it, as we move towards summer, it goes further and further north at each point on the horizon that it rises. That's called the ecliptic, that band that the sun moves through. It moves 1 degree on the ecliptic per day. And so it reaches its furthest north point at the summer solstice, and then it moves back south again toward the winter solstice. And so at each solstice point, it's for 3 days, it looks like the sun is standing still at that point on the horizon, rises in the same place each day, or it appears to, before it makes its journey back north again. So that's what the solstice means. The sun stands still at these points. Now, the other significant points in that cycle are the spring and autumn equinoxes, where it's at when the sun rises exactly due east at twice a year. And that marks when the day and night are equal at that point. It's the way that the light of the sun is hitting the earth, that day and night are perfectly equal at the equinox. That's what equinox means, equal night. But at the solstice in the winter, that's when we have the shortest day of the year and the longest night. And then, of course, the summer solstice is the longest day of the year and the shortest night. And so the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, what we're approaching just 1 week from now, is that long, dark night And so the human response when the night is long and dark is to bring light into that darkness, to ignite in the midst of that darkness. And so it feels very significant that at this pivotal moment of the solstice, which also marks when the sun transitions from Sagittarius to Capricorn, so it all happens on the same day, that Jupiter and Saturn are also aligning. And I hope you've been watching Jupiter and Saturn getting closer and closer each night throughout this year. So Jupiter and Saturn, with invisible Pluto in the mix, have been coming closer and closer throughout 2020. And they've done this dance, they've come closer, and then they move further apart. And now we really are seeing them come so close. You can watch them in the early evening as these two planets appear more and more in alignment in the night sky. And on the 21st, so now 1 week from now, they're going to appear so close to each other that they're going to, supposedly, look like a double planet. And these two planets actually have not been this close to each other visibly since 1226, the year 1226. So it was March 4th of 1226 that these two planets appeared this close. And I'm so excited to witness what that looks like, just the visible spectacle of it, let alone the archetypal astrological meaning, just the visible spectacle of seeing the two largest planets that we can perceive with the naked eye this close to each other. And because they are such large planets, they're the two largest planets in our solar system, they have, think about the gravitational pull those two planets are having being next to each other. The solar system is this balancing act of different gravitational forces. The sun, of course, has the most gravity. That's why the planets are spinning around it. But to have the two largest bodies, therefore with the most power for gravitational attraction, on the same side of the solar system, it has an effect. They pull toward it. I mean, think of the effect the moon has on our tides, where it pulls the water toward it. Jupiter and Saturn are doing a lot of pulling just at a physical level toward themselves. It actually has an effect on the sun when they're this close. It slows the sun's rotation and the output of energy in some ways. So that's just speaking astronomically what the effect is. And so what we're seeing, just to give you a few dates leading up to that December 21st exact alignment, Saturn and Jupiter have been in Capricorn. Jupiter's been in Capricorn since December of last year, so a full year. Saturn has been in Capricorn since late 2017. It is time to get Saturn out of Capricorn. We got a little bit of taste of it in March and April of this year, where it dipped into Aquarius and then retreated back into a few months longer than that, actually. July, it came back into Capricorn. But it's really time. It's time to get these two planets out of Capricorn and into a new sign, into Aquarius. And so Saturn makes that transition in just 2 days. Saturn ingresses into Aquarius, the other sign that it rules, using traditional rulerships. And then just 3 days later, on December 19th, Jupiter follows. So they're just very, very close, tracking each other, moving out of the earth sign of Capricorn into the air sign of Aquarius. And so here's another significant part of this cycle. Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions happen every 20 years. So the last time we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was in 2000. The time before that was 1981, then 1961, 1941, 1921. Those are the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions punctuating our last century. And Jupiter-Saturn alignments tend to correlate with major social shifts. It marks the end of regimes. It marks significant social change. It's like a turning of the tides. And so we see political regimes end and new ones begin, for example. We see major economic changes happen with these alignments. And, if you look back at those dates, the beginning of the 20s, the beginning of the 40s, 60s, 80s, 2000, 2020, like these are really significant markers in history. I think we're going to be looking back at 2020 and seeing it as an extremely significant marker in history for a very long time to come, likely beyond our lifetimes. So there's this punctuation with the Jupiter Saturn that marks these eras. And from a traditional perspective, this signified the fall of kings, the ends of civilization, the fall of kingdoms or regimes. And the reason for that, Saturn brings the fall, and Jupiter is the heights. It's the royalty. It's the elite, and so that's brought down in this particular understanding of how Jupiter and Saturn combine. There are many other significant expressions and correlations that I'll speak to as well, but I always find that so interesting that there's that traditional association of the fall of kings with Jupiter, Saturn, that kind of cutting down that can happen. And what does that mean now in a contemporary context, that the fall of the king or the end of a regime? So the other significant shift, not just that 20-year punctuation, but there's another cycle being activated here. And that is Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions happen in the same element, sign element, for 240 years. And then they shift. So these Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions have been happening for the last 240 years in Earth signs. The Earth signs are Capricorn, Libra, or excuse me, my brain just disappeared. Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. Those are the Earth signs. And the shift into air signs, the air signs being Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra, it marks a larger transition, a larger cycle that's unfolding. Now, when you get to the ends of these cycles, sometimes there's it's not always just clean. The reason I said Libra accidentally is because the 1980s Jupiter-Saturn conjunction did take place in Libra. So there's this stepping into air, but then it went back into Earth for the 2000 conjunction. But here we are now. Jupiter-Saturn is going to conjoin in the very first degree of Aquarius. And so there's this shift from Earth to air. And so we'll start to observe, not just this time around, but in 20 years, and then in 40 years, and in 60 years. How do these Jupiter-Saturn alignments in air differ from the last 240 years of them taking place in Earth? I have different theories of what that might be. Just very briefly to touch on, though, looking back, because I think astrology can be so helpful in terms of a retrospective, is understanding how very materialistic the last 240 years have been for so much of humanity. And so material, matter, earth, these Jupiter-Saturn alignments taking place in Earth signs for this period of time that completely encompassed industrialization, for example, and how much energy is drawn from the belly of the Earth that we see in fossil fuels, coal, oil, and so forth. Now that we're shifting to air, what does that mean? Do these alignments in air signify something less material and more ethereal, something that is more virtual, more ephemeral? We will see. Now, to speak to some of the archetypal qualities of Jupiter, Saturn. So Jupiter is that archetype of growth and expansion, joy, abundance, warmth. Jupiter is what celebrates, what brings success, what makes royal what it touches. It's the kingmaker, but it's also the king and the queen. Jupiter is the kingdom of heaven itself, the the grandeur of high civilization, highest achievements. And then having that in relationship to Saturn, Saturn being that principle of limits, of discipline, of hard work, of loss, of the weight of the world, of burdens, of pain, of suffering. Saturn is what grounds, what brings foundations, what brings structures, gravity itself. You can even see that Jupiter-Saturn quality in what I was speaking to earlier, where the size, Jupiter, this large size of Jupiter itself, the largest planet in the solar system, and Saturn, that it's their combined size of these two planets that then has this Saturnian gravitational pull and the effect physically on the solar system. So size and gravity, that's Jupiter, Saturn. And so how are some of the ways that we do see Jupiter Saturn combinations come through, and what might we invoke as well? Now, we often see under Jupiter Saturn alignments a focus on ethics and morality, philosophical judgment, jurisprudence, judgment, law, justice. There's a kind of weighing of the scales of justice right now, weighing out good and evil, weighing out the again kind of the heights and magnanimity with the reality principle. It can't all just be up and out and growth. There's also there needs to be a contending with material reality. And so we see themes such as limits Saturn to growth, figuring out how to develop sustainable growth, growth with a foundation. It's not just about Jupiterian abundance, but making that abundance last through time. Again, that theme of Saturn. So striving slowly for abundance. And about balancing a kind of joyful optimism with a pragmatic sensibility, holding both. And so we can often see Jupiter Saturn come through as like the silver lining in the difficulty, or success after long effort, or cultivating hope in the darkness. And that's why I feel like it's so beautifully synchronistic that the Jupiter Saturn alignment occurs on this longest, darkest night of the year, because there is that ignition of hope in the darkness, and a cultivation of that sense of Jupiterian joy, even in the midst of constraint, loneliness, isolation, division. How can you cultivate that within your own heart? I think we're seeing this, for example, in we're in the holiday season right now. We're in a time of year where individuals want to connect with loved ones, with family, with friends. That's how we have traditionally cultivated that light in the darkness, is through being in physical proximity and love with others. And so now under this Jupiter Saturn alignment, Saturn is constraining that. It's making it so, because of the pandemic, that loved ones can't be together. A lot of people are facing a time they would normally connect with others alone, or without as many people with them as they would like. And so there's a kind of sadness and heaviness, Saturn, in the middle of a time period that's normally devoted to Jupiterian celebration. And so being able to, again, hold this balance that Jupiter and Saturn in relationship to each other in some ways demand of us. So that's something, at least, on the Jupiter-Saturn alignment. And what I now want to do is move through the lunation cycle, just to give you a sense of what's happening in terms of each moment of the lunation, from new moon through full to the next new moon, some of the significant transits coming in there. So I will share my screen so that you can see these transits. So here we have the transits for today set for this morning when the exact um, solar eclipse took place in Sagittarius. And you can see Mercury is nearby as well. So that sun moon conjunction, the new moon, occurring with Mercury in the mix, with the mind very much involved, the intellect, ideas, intimately present with this new moon eclipse energy. What we're contemplating, what ideas we have brewing in the middle of this particular uh, new moon eclipse, and how we can, if you work with intentions at the new moon, how you can plant those ideas as part of those new moon seeds. Um, and now that we're past the time of the exact eclipse, I feel like that's really the moment to set those intentions, not during the eclipse itself, but after that has passed. So this new moon occurs when there are several other exact alignments that are worth just making note of. For example, so here's the new moon with Mercury, two other exact alignments that are occurring today as we're speaking. Venus is making a sextile, the 60-degree angle, actually to the whole Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium. So Venus, the heart, love, romance, beauty, coming into a harmonious relationship with this most potent stellium that's been defining our year. How is this affecting our heart? How is this affecting our loved ones? And today, Venus is right there with Jupiter. So the most kind of expansive and joyful of those alignments. But Saturn is very nearby. So it's kind of like a heart opening paired immediately with a feeling of heartache and distance as well. But making love real. That's the Venus Saturn, and also being able to celebrate love of all kinds, love of all connections, with that Venus Jupiter sextile. And then the other one that's happening simultaneously is that Mercury, which is right here with the sun and the moon within 3 degrees, is making an exact trine to Mars. And so that Mercury Mars alignment, it's a harmonious angle between the two, but one can speak very directly into the point in sometimes an argumentative way, or at least in a kind of debate oriented way, and get one's point across clearly. I've been noticing all day with this Mercury Mars alignment that I'm speaking faster, that there's kind of this Martian energetic drive that comes out of the words, and it's like speak really directly to things, assertively to them. There isn't a lot of beating around the bush when it comes to Mercury Mars. It's like, nope, clear, direct. You want to be careful of arguments and fighting words with the Mercury Mars, but again, it's more harmonious, and because of that trine, both of these alignments that I'm speaking to that are happening today, or that I should say are perfecting today. We notice them in the days coming up and the next several days as well. They're both soft angles. So that sextile from Venus to Jupiter is a soft angle, and that trine from Mercury to Mars is also a soft angle. And so it allows these energies to be in dialogue with each other in a way that just feels a little bit more easily accessed. They're gifts that are being offered to us rather than major challenges, or difficulties that are coming forward. So it's a very potent new moon, not just an eclipse, but one that has that Venus Jupiter kind of loving celebratory energy in the mix, and the Mercury Mars kind of clear direct communication, fiery communication as well, that can be present with that alignment. So now moving just to show you the transits on that most potent day coming up. Let me see. December 21st, so I mentioned that's the winter solstice. It's the day that the sun moves into Capricorn. Um, and it also happens to be the waxing quarter moon. You can see here's the moon um, coming into the square to the sun. The time I set it at, you'll notice that the moon is actually 3 degrees before its exact square to the sun. The reason I set it for this time, 10:21 a.m. Pacific time, is because I wanted to show you there's the exact Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Um, they meet at 0 degrees Aquarius and 29 minutes. And these two planetary bodies, like they physically kiss in the night sky. Um, and just on the heels of that, a couple hours later, that's when the moon makes its waxing square to the sun. So the moon at this point will be in the first degree of Aries. So this is a cardinal lunation that's unfolding, moving through the cardinal signs. So uh, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra. And so, as always, with that waxing quarter moon, there's a kind of stepping into the lunation cycle. If you have set intentions, there's that waxing quarter is the time where one can really step into taking action on behalf of whatever it is that intention you've set is. And actually, I always feel like the moon moving through Aries is an especially good time for that. So the waxing quarter in Aries in particular, because Aries is a Mars ruled sign, and you can see Mars is still in there. It ignites, it moves things forward, and so taking action on behalf of an intention, it's just got more energy behind it. So initiating projects at this point, what a potent moment to bring something forward in the world, because you're catching the energy of the winter solstice and the waxing quarter moon, and most especially that Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Really, just kind of an extraordinary combination of transits that we have here. So, moving forward now to the full moon, because the sun is in Capricorn. And you can see here, Mercury and the sun are just tracking with each other right now. Mercury appears very close to the sun at the moment, which means we can't see it in the night sky. But with Mercury and the sun so close, there is an additional emphasis on mercurial things. So language, communication, the mind, ideas. The sun's just kind of focusing in on that. And so then this full moon, the moon opposite the sun is going to be in Cancer. So the full moon is in her own sign. Cancer is the one sign that's ruled by the moon. So the moon is home. The moon is home and full, which really allows that lunar quality and focus on relationality, the emotions, the feelings, our embodied experience to really be highlighted, really being attuned to the body in a lot of ways, how we nurture and nourish our bodies, and being attuned to the family dynamics. I always think it's so interesting that the full moon in Cancer always happens during the latter part of the holiday season, when many of us are usually around our family members, the people we're most intimate with. And so that Cancer full moon is going to really put the focus on our family dynamics. And if we need to attend to anything there, be attuned to anything, and this time around with Mercury there, we can have the potential at least to bring in more of kind of a rational perspective, an intellectual perspective on these lunar dynamics. So really thinking through from a grounded, and I'm bringing the grounded in because of the Capricorn placement, a grounded, logical place. Why are you feeling the way you're feeling? how can you attend to and attune to those feelings, those emotions at this full moon in Cancer? When we move forward now to the waning quarter moon, so now um, I've been doing these forecasts throughout 2020, and suddenly, as I was preparing for today, I was like, right, we're crossing the threshold into a new year, into 2021. And so while the full moon happens December 29th, right at the end of 2020, by the time we reach the waning quarter moon, we have entered into 2021. We've entered into a new year, and dynamics are indeed beginning to shift at this point. So you can see here, it's the waning quarter moon in Libra. The moon's in Libra in the square to the sun. And there are let me just check my notes here. Um, there are multiple dynamics that are unfolding on this day. First of all, you can see the sun is approaching this stellium that's been unfolding. Now you can see at the core of it, okay, there's the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, there's Pluto. So these are our three who've been kind of the main characters of 2020, but they're pulling apart. The story's changing. At this point in time, Mercury's in there. So again, our messenger of the gods is in the mix with Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. The sun is approaching. It's going to be highlighting it more within a few days, but it's starting to turn its focus, its light onto this stellium. And the other very significant thing that happens this day uh, with the waning quarter moon is that Mars, just a little bit after this time of the actual exact moon square sun alignment, Mars moves out of Aries and into Taurus. So Mars has been in its own sign of Aries since late June of 2020. That is a ridiculously long amount of time for Mars to be in one sign. And it's because Mars ingressed into Aries. It moved all the way through the sign, all the way up to 28 degrees, so almost the very end. And then on September 9th, turned retrograde, came all the way back halfway through the sign to 15 degrees, so right at the midpoint, turned direct November 13th, and is then spending the next few months moving forward again through that sign. So finally, on January 6th, Mars moves out of Aries and into Taurus. And so conditions start to change because Mars moves into Taurus, which is no longer a fire sign, no longer a Mars ruled sign. It's an earth sign ruled by Venus. So suddenly Mars is in a realm that isn't as familiar, that isn't as comfortable. It can't just burn hot like it's been doing since the end of June. It has to be tempered. It has to adjust to this other environment. But sometimes in adjustments, there can be frustration and there can be difficulty. And so I want to move first up to that next new moon. This will be the Capricorn new moon, because now you can really see the dynamics that are unfolding, not just at the Capricorn new moon, but throughout January. And why we can really start to see this major shift from the end of 2020 into 2021. So the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, that's starting to break up, starting to move apart. They are still all pretty close together here. That stellium at the new moon is just extraordinary. There's, the sun moon conjunction in Capricorn. Venus is also in Capricorn at that point. I'll speak to the date when it comes in a moment. But look at that sun moon conjunction within 1 degree of Pluto, which indicates that this is going to be an extremely intense period of time as the sun and moon move so close to Pluto. Pluto being that archetype of death and rebirth, destruction and creation, of transmutation, of power struggles, power dynamics, power shifts, empowerment. So Pluto being so focused there, the sun is highlighting the plutonic, the underworld, the depths, the dark underbelly of humanity. And on that day with the new moon, the moon itself brings the feeling of all that into our emotions, into our embodied experience. And so if you find yourself feeling really intensely around this time period, this may be a reflection of why. So just an extraordinary stellium. Stellium is when you have 3 or more planets all in conjunction, lined up here: Moon, Sun, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury. And then look at that. It's all square, this 90-degree angle to Mars, now in Taurus, and Uranus. So we've been experiencing what it's like to have Mars square this stellium for months now. And I'll go more into the exact dates of that shortly, where, in August, Mars squared Jupiter, then Saturn, then Pluto. Or it wasn't in that order. In August, it was Mars square Jupiter, then Mars square Pluto, then Mars square Saturn. And then when it went retrograde, it passed in reverse order back over those. And now it's making its way forward again, now being today as I'm speaking, crossing in the square to Pluto first. And then it'll move more spread out this time. It's not just hitting them, a few days apart like it was in the late summer and the autumn. Now it's further. They're each kind of spread out through time. And again, I'll give you those dates. But what we see here at the close of this lunation cycle is that Mars is at this point starting to conjoin Uranus. So yes, we got Mars out of Aries where it's very fiery, but now we're bringing it in close proximity to the trickster, to the awakener, to the liberator. And a metaphor that I often like to use for Mars-Uranus alignments, that those who've worked with me have probably heard me say, if Mars is the fire, Uranus is like pouring gasoline on it. So there can definitely be unexpected ignition of anger, of outbursts, of violence. So this is going to be a dominant alignment in January. And I think that's something for us to be really mindful of. Mars already had such a significant role to play throughout 2020, and it's going to really define the beginning of 2021 as well. And so just speaking to that potential of the sudden unleashing of violence. And we're seeing that right now too, as Mars is in the square to Pluto, and Saturn and Jupiter. Mars as god of war is being activated in so many ways. And as individuals, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. How do we work with that kind of Martian energy when it's being inflected by all these different transpersonal outer planetary archetypes? And I think sometimes the best we can do is just look at our own relationship to Mars. How do we express anger? Do we hold it in? Do we choose not to express it? Are we passive aggressive? Do we have sudden outbursts? Do we stew on things and rage? Do we have shame about feeling anger? We all have our different relationship to Mars because we all have Mars in a different place in our birth charts. And Mars is that vital fire that lets us take action and get things done. But it's also what can burn things down and really create harm. And so we have to be so mindful of how we direct that Martian energy. And I think the important thing is not suppressing it, but finding the right channels, finding the ways to allow Mars to move through us and us to direct that energy like an artist, rather than it simply being unleashed unconsciously. So this is the just extraordinary set of transits that we'll end this lunation cycle with. And it's funny speaking about it. There's something that feels so far away about this Capricorn new moon. I know it's just a month from now, less than a month from now, speaking today at the Sagittarius new moon, but it really feels like a world away to me. Maybe that's just my own personal feeling. But as this year comes to a close, and as all these pivotal transits line up with the eclipse that happened today, with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, moving forward to Mars finally leaving Aries, even just the, the pivotal year of 2020 coming to a close, whether you count the new year as beginning on January 1st, 2021, or you count the new year as beginning at the winter solstice, because that's the new year in a cosmological sense, or any other time that you might count the new year to begin, it's undeniable that something very significant is ending right now. And whenever something significant ends, it makes the space for something new to begin. And so the questions that we can hold going forward, especially with that Jupiter Saturn conjunction, is what do we want to begin? What do we want to call forward at this pivotal moment in the year? So I just want to touch on a few more significant transits, just giving a few dates there outside of that structure of the lunation cycle. So I've already been speaking to Mars in that alignment with these outer planets, and so I just want to give the dates for that in case that's helpful. Mars is making its last square to Pluto on December 23rd, so just 2 days after the winter solstice. And Mars Pluto is definitely like very intense. It can be rage energy for sure. Think of like the violent eruption of a volcano. Can emotionally be that way. It actually can be the deep eruption of violence, some of which we are seeing playing out in the collective. Um, there's a deep kind of sexual erotic energy to Mars Pluto too. It's without Venus in the mix, without that kind of tempering of love. It's more like the instinctual libido. And so how do we direct the libido under Mars Pluto transits? When I think of Mars Pluto, I often think of like the ferocious roar of a tiger, or like a lion in heat. Like where do we wield that energy? How do we wield that energy? Um, the That's kind of the first significant date in terms of Mars's passage. Um, January 6th, as I mentioned, that's going to be the ingress into Taurus. So Mars moving out of Aries and into Taurus. Um, Following that, January 12th, so with the Capricorn new moon, that's when Mars makes it square to Saturn. So Mars Saturn, um, I always like to use different fire metaphors to be able to understand Mars in combination with the other planetary archetypes. So like Mars and Pluto, it's like comparing a fire to a volcano. You kind of get that energy. Mars with Saturn is like um, it's kind of like running into a firewall. Saturn is that firewall, and the fire kind of licks up against it but can't get through. Another metaphor that I like to use is when the bonfires burn down to the coals, and so those coals can last all night long. So there's an enduring quality with Mars Saturn. Um, it can also, Mars Saturn can bring about a lot of frustration, because Mars's impulse is to move forward and take action and do. And Saturn says, nope, no, you're not doing that. It negates it. It tries to contain it, whether it's containing anger, containing energy, blocking it. And so you get this kind of like grinding, frustrating feeling that comes with Mars Saturn. Where it's just this sense of like, where does that energy go? How does it get channeled? And sometimes it really can feel stuck. And so that's when you can draw on the Saturnian gift of structure and organization and planning. And so looking, well, how am I going to expend my energy long term? And figuring out like the long game there. And sometimes with Mars Saturn, you just want to get a hammer and some nails and just build something. That's probably one of the best channels for this energy. Like, get your hands on some wood, some metal, just physically embody it. There's no reason to have to make it all, psychological or um, emotional or relational. It's like, no, just get your hands on something and build something physical in that time. So, um, again, quite significant. It feels like that Mars Saturn square, the last one. It feels like there's been so many Mars Saturn alignments throughout this past year, um, that is going to happen right at that Capricorn new moon. And of course, Capricorn being a Saturn ruled sign, it's just like a lot of Saturn energy at play in that window. Um, and then, I pointed out there, you could see Mars coming closer to Uranus. And that's the one where I said, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. That's more like the sudden, unexpected ignition, where it's just like some Mars radically ignites. And that will be coming in throughout January, but it makes its exact alignment on January 20th. And if you're in the States, January 20th is very close to a really significant date, the inauguration. And so if you think about that, sudden ignition of violence or anger or outbursts, we're definitely going to want to just be very conscious of that energy and how we're all participating in various ways with those dynamics. There's also, this is more in terms of, say, personal transits, but I'm keeping, well, no, this isn't. This is true. This is applicable collectively. With that, both Mars in the square to Saturn and Mars in the conjunction to Uranus, that combination, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, can have an accident-prone quality. And so, particularly, like, think about driving. Just being more conscious, like on the highway or as you're moving about. This is both at an individual level, being mindful of your own body moving through space, but also just kind of collectively. Now, I think this would be an interesting study to look at, like, are there more accidents under Mars Uranus world transits, or under Mars Saturn, especially Mars Saturn Uranus world transits? To do kind of like a very systematic study. Are there peaks there? But I have definitely found in my own life that, there's more of those near misses that take place, particularly under those Mars Uranus alignments. So just be careful, take care of yourself, please. Now, I know I'm past this lunation, these dates, but I just wanted to give them in terms of Mars, that conjunction with Uranus does take place on January 20th. And then finally, that square to Jupiter kind of completes the story, is just a few days later, January 23rd. And so that sequence, the way that sequence unfolds, we've been seeing, because of how Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all kind of shifting in relationship to each other, we see Mars cross it in different orders. So as I mentioned, like back in August, Mars squared Jupiter and then Pluto and then Saturn. This time, much more spread out. It's squaring Pluto and then Saturn and then Jupiter. And actually, I really like that sequence because we finally get to end the story with Jupiter. And that Jupiter is that successful celebratory outcome. Mars has been doing this dance with the stellium for a long, long time. And so my hope, at least, is that with it ending with Jupiter, there is more of this kind of magnanimous sense of expansion and joy and celebration that can come through. And so this turns me now toward another transit that's coming in that I haven't really talked about yet, but is going to be coming through in the next several months. And it's already in orb. And that is the fact that Jupiter is starting to square Uranus in the sky. So we've had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. They're coming closer and closer, as I keep talking about. And now they're also making a square, 90-degree angle to Uranus. And so we're seeing, first of all, that Saturn-Uranus square. I'm going to be talking about that a lot throughout next year. Saturn's going to be square Uranus throughout 2023. So we've got some time with that one. And Saturn-Uranus is all about finding the balance between, on the one hand, Saturn, the past, tradition, structures, what's old, and Uranus, what's new, what's innovative, what's different, what's creative. Saturn, Uranus, when they're in dynamic relationship with each other, can come through as a kind of restructuring, revisioning of the past, and can look to, what's worked historically, what hasn't worked, what do we want to revise, what do we want to throw out, what do we want to carry forward. And considering the fact that this Saturn-Uranus square is coming on the heels of this Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto pandemic crisis, there is a lot of revising of systems that's going to be taking place over these next several years. And so we're going to be seeing that restructuring coming through in a lot of different areas of life, at a collective level and also at a personal level. But in the midst of that, the shorter transit is that Jupiter also is square to Uranus. And Jupiter-Uranus alignments tend to bring sudden radical breakthroughs. It's the, I always think of a hot air balloon taking off with Jupiter-Uranus. It's the sudden creative burst, this kind of wonderment, this youthful energy that that ignites. And so we see it as, it can be creative, artistic breakthroughs, it can be scientific breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, political breakthroughs. There is this sense of relief that can come in with Jupiter Uranus. And again, considering everything that has unfolded this year, to have a Jupiter Uranus alignment, even if it's a square, even if it's being held down by Saturn, that's a nice gift, a nice blessing to be given, where that moment where you just pause and say, thank the Lord, thank the gods and goddesses for whatever is coming through here. And because Saturn is in there, it's like the balloon that expands and then might contract, expands, might contract. So, breakthroughs, innovations, but a lot of questions about them too. Are we being practical? Are we being pragmatic with these breakthroughs? Are they real? Are they lasting? So Saturn's going to be an inherent part of that Jupiter-Uranus alignment, but it's there, it's present. And within this lunation cycle, right before the end, right before the next new moon, Mercury is going to be crossing that Jupiter-Uranus. And so I have a feeling toward the end of this lunation cycle, we're going to be seeing a lot of new, brilliant ideas coming forward in probably a lot of different arenas. And so for you personally, this may be your moment to think about, what radical, new, brilliant idea do you want to bring forward? Do you want to be able to birth at this time? Because with Jupiter, Uranus, and Saturn even helping to contain it, this is a moment collectively where we can lean into our creative potential, that project you've been sitting on, that you just haven't had the inspiration yet to see through. Well, a Jupiter-Uranus time period, which is a 14-month transit, that's a good time to take that risk and to try and bring forward that creative birth. So in each person's own individual way, I just want to encourage that to lean into that creative potential.